We remember the dark days of the 1970s and the 1980s, when there were news broadcasts in the American media and beyond that heralded what was termed the nation for sale, as the Bahamas was unfortunately labeled by some investigative reporters at that time. Yet today, we are again facing the reputational fallout from an explosive indictment that was filed in the Southern District of New York that yet again brought to mind that sad and unfortunate era in modern Bahamian history. It is not a path that we should be walking down again. The reputation of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is under siege, and the Bahamian people are losing confidence in the Prime Minister and believe that when required, he will not act. It brings us no joy in the Free National Movement to be here this afternoon to lament this tragic position we find ourselves in. Once word came down of the indictment, we all hoped against hope that finally our Prime Minister would have come to understand the crisis of leadership facing the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Defense Force, law enforcement agencies in general, and of course those in the executive and the Parliament who preside over the public service. Unfortunately, what we had hoped for, and that is that the Prime Minister would finally appreciate how his very action and inaction over the past 3 years have further undermined the institutional integrity of our government institutions and the names of the thousands of honest law enforcement agents who continue to dedicate their lives to serving our country. We all had hoped that he would accept and acknowledge how his failure to enforce the existing accountability provisions in the law would in fact have dire consequences relative to our reputation. In fact, he neglected to enforce the very provisions in his own blueprint for change. And he didn't appreciate how all of these failures would further erode public trust, not just locally, but internationally. As a result, it has fueled a very toxic environment in which we now find ourselves as a country. Bahamians are now wondering what else in government is likely to be revealed that would cause us both local and international embarrassment. But unfortunately, based on our Prime Minister's sad performance in the House of Assembly, it is clear to all who heard him talking about shaking the tree that he has offered the Bahamians no measures that would restore confidence. It is the same tired rhetoric, more of him pretending that he is outraged. He is ill-qualified to be a tree shaker. What we heard was more of the same. To the Bahamian people who were looking to him to provide clear leadership in the most crucial of moments, the Prime Minister demonstrated that he has neither the appreciation of the gravity of the situation nor the resolve to do what needs to be done. He is unprepared to make the tough decisions that he must know in his gut he has to make. Since its inception, the Free National Movement has stood for integrity and reform in the Bahamas. We haven't always been perfect, but we have consistently strived to fight against the lack of transparency and accountability in government. And that was at the genesis of our organization. And having served in 4 non-consecutive terms, we'll put those terms up against all of the PLP time in government, and we believe the public would agree that we are in a better position to provide accountability. Today, I stand not just as the leader of the Free National Movement, but as a representative of all Bahamians who demand accountability, who demand transparency and justice from their government. The time has come to confront the many controversies and systemic failures that have plagued our beloved country. And as we seek, when we take over, to clean house, we clean all colors. Let me outline the key issues that have been undermining our governance, as well as the measures we pledge to take in order to address it. We all have a duty to make sure that the reputation of our country and the institutions of our country are respected. And we are grateful to all of the public servants, all of the law enforcement agents who continue to work hard, smart, and honestly on behalf of our country. Having said that, we will not shy away from addressing the fact that there are some who are not acting in the best interests of the collective. And some of them serve at the highest level in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so, as we seek to weed out the bad actors, it is important for us to take a look at what we, as a country, are being accused of. One, the indictment outlined drug trafficking facilitation. In November 2024, a U.S. federal indictment accused high-ranking Bahamian law enforcement officials of facilitating drug and arms trafficking throughout the country, with a high-ranking politician alleged to be involved. On top of the damning direct allegations, the indictment speaks of a total breakdown between our American allies and ourselves in the decades-long OPBAT partnership arrangement between ourselves, the Americans, and the Turks and Caicos law enforcement officials. This OPBAT partnership had for decades successfully disrupted the activities of major drug traffickers who had in the past been using the Bahamas as a major transshipment point for cocaine en route to the United States. The indictment details how the situation has deteriorated to the point where our American counterparts felt that Bahamian law enforcement officials could not be trusted to operate in good faith and in the execution of interdiction activities under the auspices of the program. They went as far as to avoid, imagine, telling the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of National Security, Minister of Foreign Affairs, their intentions. One clear manifestation of the lack of faith and trust of the American authorities with the Bahamian administration and Bahamian police force is the fact that no Bahamian official, including those who I called earlier, Prime Minister, Minister of the National Security, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, none of them apparently were aware that these Bahamians were under active investigation for 3 years. The second issue that brings us here this afternoon and have Bahamians deeply concerned is the police corruption investigation. In July of 2024, the chief superintendent who headed CDU was implicated in negotiating bribes with a wanted criminal in exchange for the suspect and friends of that suspect having or obtaining freedom. In the aftermath of this armor car robbery, at least 3 suspects have been murdered. At least 3 innocent bystanders were murdered while a 4th person who they were looking for managed to escape. And at least 1 additional person was murdered and it has been speculated in retaliation for those 3 suspects being killed. Despite the alarming number of persons murdered in relation to one robbery, the public to date has not gotten any reasonable or detailed report from the government or the police force on this alarming case, which to every family who has lost a loved one is a case that is as important as the indictment that has this country outraged. Thirdly, there have been other serious allegations relative to law enforcement across the spectrum. Those allegations included senior officers being implicated in rape matters, business persons being robbed of $90,000, and a coroner that sees matters fundamentally different than the Commissioner or the Minister of National Security, to the extent that they have made recommendations that fly in the face of what has been stated by the Minister, what has been stated by the Commissioner. The fourth matter that concerns us deeply and speaks to, again, the need for us to protect the reputation of Bahamian professionals and our country is the collapse of FTX. We recall the Davis administration's involvement in the FTX debacle, where convict Sam Bankman-Fried felt comfortable enough to have a direct email conversation with the country's Attorney General and to improperly, in our view, seek the Attorney General's guidance on a special treatment for select clients for the imperiled crypto exchange that had come under full regulatory supervision of the Securities Commission of the Bahamas. More so, documents filed with the U.S. state courts indicate that FTX had paid out donations totaling almost $700,000 to what is reported as entities affiliated with a high-ranking Bahamian government official and their families. Again, this is about accountability, transparency, and the protection of our reputation. The fifth area of concern is the irregularities in the Ministry of Immigration. We recall that Minister Keith Bell administered citizenship during a funeral, an act that was both inappropriate and unprecedented, sparking public outrage and questions about ministerial discretion, and in this case, the lack thereof. We recall that Minister Bell interfered unlawfully, we believe, with immigration officers in the execution of their duties as they sought to apprehend Chinese migrants here without proper documentation. You would recall that Minister Bell sought to implicate the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Tourism in saying he was acting on his direction. The Deputy Prime Minister have denied that allegation, but the Prime Minister has not sought to provide us with a clear answer on which of them were telling the truth. We recall that the Director of Immigration had been so concerned with the irregular actions and improper interference of Minister Bell that she was compelled to report him to the Permanent Secretary. And in fact, the Prime Minister admitted that he was made aware of the concerns by senior public officials, but he did nothing. In fact, he was more concerned about how the information got into the public domain as opposed to the information provided. And this is the man who wishes to convince us that he will shake the tree. We recall that the Prime Minister named a toothless so-called commission to make recommendations on improvements at immigration. The commission has never reported, and the Prime Minister has never had the more serious allegations of impropriety addressed. Just recently, 6th controversial issue. The Bahama corruption allegation has recently surfaced. A $1.6 billion judgment against China Construction America exposed fraudulent practices and alleged improper payments to curry favor with government officials. The specifics of the allegation, I believe, are well documented. Suffice it to say, allegations of improper payments, that is, the court decision highlighted a $2.3 million payment from CCA to Nodak Management Group led by the son of a senior advisor to the then Prime Minister. The payment was characterized as an attempt to curry favor with the Bahamian government during the Bahama dispute. If I recall correctly, the present Prime Minister was the Deputy Prime Minister, and he showed early signs then that he was not in the business of shaking trees. With respect to delays in the Procurement Act and its implementation, despite being a critical tool for transparency, which this government claims that it is committed to, the government has failed to uphold the legal requirements that multi-million-dollar bids be put out for bidding and that the names of the winning bids be published. This allows for corrupt political favors to be doled out, and it opens the doors for kickbacks and shoddy work done by political operatives not qualified in some cases for the work that they get. Worse, the government breaks the law daily by not publishing all the names of the persons who secure the relevant contracts. In yet another area, 8, there are unexplained delays in financial reporting. We have mentioned this over and over, that this government is really not in the business of meeting deadlines mandated by law to keep the country abreast of the fiscal position of our country. 9, the government contract reporting has been abysmal. And during the question and answer period, we would no doubt cite several key areas where the government has failed to report on contracts that have, in some cases, been doled out for more than $50 million. In other cases, more than $60 million. These examples and many more that show over and over again that whenever this Prime Minister has had an opportunity to demonstrate resolve and tackle the potential of corruption, he has failed to act. And so we go back to his pronouncements in the House of Assembly that many Bahamians simply do not believe he will do anything different. This is why no Bahamian anywhere is moved by his crocodile tears, his fake outrage, and his idle promises that he will be decisive. Turning again to the matter of law enforcement, what our Prime Minister must do is appreciate that just since January, the scandals that I have outlined earlier have emerged. And if you have a minister with responsibility for national security and a commissioner of police that has access to tremendous resources, intelligence officers, and the entire apparatus of government to assist them in the execution of their job, and yet they fail to detect investigations that have been going on under their nose for at least 3 years. But if we were to park that issue alone and look at all of the other matters that I've raised and others have raised in the public domain, and yet they have not been able to address the litany of issues, the series of issues that Bahamians have raised. The question is, do they remain fit to execute those jobs? The reality is that both the minister and the commissioner of police are tasked with helping to coordinate stakeholders so that we are able to reduce crime in general, violent crimes in particular, and even more specifically, to reduce the crimes against women and girls. And their failure to assist this country in fact, reducing the very thing that they were tasked, they were hired to do, disqualifies them from continuing 1 more year, 2 more years in those positions. It is our hope that when the Commissioner speaks later on tonight, that among the various things that he would say is he would accept responsibility for his inability, and that the Minister, when he speaks, would accept his responsibility and for his inability to impact the portfolios which they have been granted, and that they would step aside. We trust that such an announcement is imminent on both scores, but the Prime Minister has an obligation in the absence of those individuals failing to act. He must show strength of character, and he must make a decision and release them from their duties. We demand that the Prime Minister take the immediate steps to request that the Governor General establish a commission of inquiry that will examine the culture of corruption in parts of our law enforcement community, and that such a commission should also examine other public officials whose actions coincide with this culture of corruption. There cannot be one rule for the young man who lives where I grew up in Key West Street, or Florida Court, or Melbourne Road in Yellow Elder, and then there is a different rule for a high-ranking government official or senior officers. The terms of reference for the commission would include an examination into what intelligence and information the senior command of the police force had obtained on a range of alleged corrupt activities, and what mitigating actions were taken in light of this information. The same question applies to the government. What did you know and when? The commission would also review the protocols for managing complaints against the police and the means for ensuring ongoing comprehensive international as well as local investigations when necessary. It is important that all of our agencies are treated with the same kind of vigilance and diligence. It includes Customs, Immigration, the Defense Force, and the Royal Bahamas Police Force. Among the commissioners appointed should be reputable local and international professionals. And the Secretariat for the Commission must also include seasoned investigators from abroad and locally who have participated in international investigations of law enforcement and be given the latitude to examine even high-ranking government officials whose actions tie in with the various issues that we are now discussing today. And by the way, in response to the Minister of National Security who talked about the uselessness of commissions of inquiries, I only remind the public that we've had commissions before that have yielded results in 1962, in 1967, and in 1984. But let's be clear. At the end of the day, all of us deserve to know how the sovereignty of the Bahamas is being compromised. All of us have a right to know whether or not we have the right gatekeepers who are presiding over law and order in the Bahamas. We have a right to know. that those who are incarcerated, are they incarcerated righteously? And some who are free, are they free because they have had help to evade the law? Commissions have a way of shining a light in some very dark places. And there are many persons, including some who've participated in the skullduggery, that are willing to testify. We should give them an opportunity. As this setup of investigation of the Commission of Inquiry, as we discuss this issue of how it will be set up, the Prime Minister ought to announce his plans immediately in advance of such a commission, which we challenge him, we demand of him to set up. He must augment the police's force mechanism of investigating itself to ensure that we add to that apparatus independent, respected persons empowered by law to help us determine if police actions, if defense force, if customs, if immigration actions are appropriate, lawful, ethical. We cannot afford to have any confusion on whether or not the police is investigating the police. That ship has now sailed in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. In fact, very few people believe that any of the matters we talked about, if you leave it up to the agency themselves, that you're going to get a truthful and accurate account of the facts. Just ask the young man who was struck by a vehicle driven by a cabinet member, allegedly. Let me be clear. We know for certain that the majority of our police force, including some senior officers, are fine and upstanding Bahamian professionals. The Prime Minister should want their reputations to be protected. And every day he delays in making sure that there are transparent investigations, the thousands, the overwhelming majority of our law enforcement officers are being left out there to be suspected of things they have never, ever participated in. We get calls and messages regularly from officers who express their frustration at how the system is clogged up and how upward mobility is a problem and how the handful of persons who act ultra-virus of the law is making it difficult for them despite their best efforts. We are here today to fight for all of their reputations. For every law-abiding defense force officer, police officer, customs and immigration officer, for every parliamentarian that have not sat down and negotiated the use of the Bahamas as a transshipment point, we are here today fighting for them. We are here today fighting for the reputation of every business person here in the Bahamas and abroad that wish to do business, but not here and internationally, but not under a cloud of suspicion, because a handful of persons driven by greed are in fact sullying the reputation of our country. We would have thought the Prime Minister would have been equally committed to wanting to clear up these matters. We all heard the Prime Minister promise new legislation as his one and only response to the crisis. The reality is he has legislation that he will not follow today. We have the Ombudsman Act. Has he done anything to truly empower that office? We have the Freedom of Information Act. The Commissioner has done all that he can, that is the Information Commissioner associated with the Freedom of Information Act, and he says all that's left is for the government to spend the required money to put the infrastructure in place. So we know there are many pieces of legislation that this Prime Minister is not at all committed to. Fred Mitchell tells us that on a regular basis, that we are not on your run, i.e., we are not on the Bahamian people's run when they demand transparency. And so adding new laws will not change what this government is not prepared to do. And what is that? They are not prepared to shake the tree so that bad apples could fall. Because there are some apples that they like where they are.
That's right.
The opposition plans for reform. We need a brand new approach to governance in the Bahamas. When elected, a free national movement government under my leadership will move quickly to enshrine and execute legislation and policies to bring about accountability and transparency. And one way to do it is simply to insist that we follow the laws that are already on the books. We refuse to accept these systemic failures. Here's what we will do in very specific terms. We will end the political appointments of heads of the uniform branches by passing legislation that sets out basic qualifications for the senior leadership positions in the security agencies that will require an open application and regimented and rigorous interview process for the prospective candidates. No elected official would be able to promote persons into a position that is not among the two top candidates being recommended by the respective service commissions. In other words, the commissions that are in place by law ought to have the ability to narrow the field to two candidates rather than a policymaker bypassing all of it. And by the way, the persons who are in place right now, the Prime Minister emphasized that he wanted his people in place because he has confidence in them, he knows their track record, and they will be able to get the job done. The F&M not wanting to stand in the way of a Prime Minister, registered concerns, and in some cases in writing. So he has the perfect storm. He has the team that he desires. But the country does not have the results we need. We will implement a full suite of anti-corruption legislation, and the Prime Minister himself has acknowledged the need for some of these. We should have an integrity commission. We should have a code of conduct for public officials. Importantly, following best practices, the Integrity Commission would be an independent body fully empowered to investigate, report on, and recommend individuals for criminal sanctions on matters related to allegations of corruption of public servants, as well as elected and appointed government officials. The Commission would be under the control and direction of no particular minister, and will be mandated to use the vehicle of the House of Assembly to ensure that those reports are made available to the public. Let me just pause very quickly and say we are concerned that the absence of an independent parliament allows the executive to influence what goes on in parliament and influence how the Public Accounts Committee reports to the public. We have written the Speaker of the House seeking to have public hearings televised so that the public can hear the questions we are putting to various government officials as we have been doing so. And the Speaker, I believe, bullied by, we believe, the Attorney General, continues to interfere. Not only does he interfere and would reduce that interference to writing when he seeks to mislead, in our view, the Speaker, who should not be, in fact, the lawyer for the Speaker. The Speaker ought to, as an independent head of the third arm of government, should have attorneys of her own. But he's not contented just to do that in writing. He's even prepared to sit down in the gallery, which we hope he will never, ever pass that bar again in the history of the Bahamas to be a member of Parliament. And he seeks to direct the Speaker from his seat. He missed the power, but he squandered it because he had a private opportunity that he could not pass up when he was once given a chance. to be a public servant. Secondly, measures that we would implement. We will fully implement and fund the Ombudsman and Freedom of Information Act. 3, we will strengthen the fiscal oversight so that we guard against ministers, directors, and others, and financial secretaries overreaching in the execution of their jobs relative to financial matters. We will reform immigration policies and introduce a robust framework to ensure that all citizens and immigration decisions comply with legal standards, subject to independent review. We will enforce the transparency requirement in the Procurement Act. 6, restore financial integrity in terms of how we do business. The DARE Act clearly outlined provisions which we believe should have caused Sam Bankman-Fried and others to face our justice system. The question is, what has happened there that prevented this? We must restore financial integrity. 7, we must support business ethics. We know that there's a saying in the Bahamas that the wheels of the system only turn by grease. Well, we want to bring that to an end, or at least reduce it to an irreducible minimum, where when you are expecting efficiency and effectiveness in the system, you don't believe that you have to actually spend your money in order to get any public official, whether they're in the executive, whether they're in the parliament, or any other government ministries. They should not have to be incentivized to do their job. And then, of course, we want to promote accountability on all major projects. If you're single sourcing some major project for 60 million, 100 million, 120 million, the public deserves to know what is the interest rate on those projects that the Bahamian people will have to pay back. And we want to make sure that all of the details are published. And so, ladies and gentlemen of the press, F&Ms, we wanted to take the time to not only point out those issues that have so many Bahamians angry at the position our country has been placed in, but we wanted to forecast the things we intend to do. The truth is, everyone in this room, everyone listening who's at home, it is not sufficient for you to be outraged and wait for election. You should be outraged and act now. Whatever constituency you're in, whatever constituency you're in, you need to send a message to your member of parliament. In fact, we're going to help you. On Wednesday, we're asking you to come downtown Bay Street, send a message downtown Bay Street. On Wednesday morning at 9, you can write them a letter. You can tell them when they come knocking on your door 3 years later that you have not stood up for us. You can send a message, not just on the election day, but election day is important. And so when they reapply, as they are now, for you to renew their contract, you must tell them, hell no, you got to. Hell no? And so, as I close, I simply want to end where I began. We are here today to protect the reputation of our institutions. The thousands of law enforcement agents, persons in Parliament who are seeking to do their job the right way. We are here to protect their reputation. For every business person who work in the Bahamas or overseas, who will be looked at sideways because others are walking crooked. We are here fighting for you. And we ask you to stand with us as we stand with you. God bless all of you. At this time, we would open the floor for questions from members of the media.
Saying he throws his full backing with the Prime Minister to deal with the situation?
I mean, the first thing I would say is this is really not about the Americans. It is most unfortunate that Bahamians are even more outraged because there isn't an indictment of Bahamians in the U.S. That's most unfortunate. The matter I mentioned concerning at least 7 persons having lost their life related to one heist is a critical issue for us. So I want to begin there by saying this is really not about the U.S. per se. We know, all of us, many of us in this room, we went to university in the United States. So we know that the United States is not the paragon of virtue. So it isn't as if they don't have very serious corruption issues at all levels, public and in the private sector. So that's not the issue. The issue is we are a country of laws, and we ought to abide by those laws. And there's a higher standard for the gatekeepers, for those who preside over, preside over Parliament, over the executive of the country, for those that are in law enforcement, because in Parliament we make the laws. So people are not expecting that we are colluding with criminals to break the very laws that we're putting in place. Secondly, the public is not expecting that law enforcement agents would themselves participate in criminal activity. And so what we say to Mr. Mitchell, we believe that we have an incredible country with incredible people, and the overwhelming majority of Bahamians are law-abiding citizens. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the exceptions to the rule, those who are not abiding by the laws. Is he saying that the exceptions that are bringing disrepute on our country, that we should let them go because matters have come to light? It is our hope that he is not making that point.
Questions. I don't know if you saw the Tribune's front page top story on Friday, but Giovanni Roll, he was shot and killed by jet aviation, and the person that was a suspect, he's in that indictment, and she raised questions considering that Chief Superintendent Elvis Cruz was investigating that matter. The heist that happened, that also happened at the airport. Is the FNM calling for a review of the cases he handled when he was Chief Superintendent?
The point we have made earlier is that when you don't have transparent investigation in the range of issues, you then open up the kinds of discussion that appeared on the front page of the Tribune. That people begin to wonder that if you had a strategically placed senior officer, what cases have never come to court because they decided they would look the other way or act. But let's not stay there. If you are a member of the executive, and I once served in the cabinet of the Bahamas, and you are privy to information that can help your country and its citizens abide by the law, and you fail to act, you then open up the whole country to all kinds of suspicions. One of the examples, concrete examples, we ask, can you reveal the amount of money you paid in secret settlements to persons who felt that they were aggrieved by the former government when we were in the chair? By failing to simply reveal how much you paid, here's what the government has done to senior officers who might ordinarily be completely honest men and women of integrity. You now open them up to all kinds of speculation. Because if in other jurisdictions, an officer is moved by one administration, placed elsewhere, and they were embarrassed, they felt they were inconvenienced, and there's a rep, and the court says they should be awarded something. If in another jurisdiction, they would be awarded $100,000, but in your secret settlement, we find out it's $1 million, then it begs the question, how is it that most jurisdictions where this identical action has occurred, there is an additional $900,000 being paid in the Bahamas? Now, we don't know if it's $900,000. What we do know is that the Prime Minister, as the Minister of Finance, the Attorney General, has failed to reveal what the figure is. And so they are opening up lots of people to speculations that we shouldn't even be having the discussion.
Is it the hope of the opposition that the government would release that name that's allegedly involved in this indictment before it's revealed in a New York court? Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, actually, the government should. What is ironic about this is, in this room and nationwide, most persons have speculated now they're probably up to 12, 13 cabinet ministers they are speculating about. It is not fair. It is not fair to have a public speculating about all of these government officials and consultants and persons who work in the Prime Minister's office. It's not fair to have that done, particularly if you have information and you insist that that person resign. They should step aside. And so again, do we expect that they would share the information? If we go by their track record, it's slim to no chance of them doing it. However, the information does have a way of finding itself into the public domain.
Wanted to hear from the Commissioner of Police tonight. Now, he has promised that before the year's end that they will give an update on the investigation into Chief Superintendent Michael Johnson. Do you think that's going to happen? There are questions if the UK investors, independent investigators have come. Do you think that you get an update on that as well?
Well, we've been hoping for a number of investigations, the results to be made public. Again, the track record of this administration and unfortunately some of the agencies have been consistent. They have consistently not followed through on sharing the details of the investigations that they have engaged in. And so it's important, as the media consistently does, for you to continue to ask the question. Members of the public are continuing to ask the question. But more importantly, members of the public are drawing conclusions. They believe that this government has a lot to hide, which is why they refuse to be transparent, even for the simplest of questions that are asked of them. So no, we don't have confidence, and we're still waiting to know which international agencies have been invited in to assist with the investigations.
Okay, I just wanted to give the academic chance. Okay, I just wanted to give the academic chance to speak to something that was said beyond the headlines by Mr. Leslie Miller last week. I think it was Wednesday. And that Mr. Albert Curtis, he was able to jump two ranks from skip over superintendent to chief superintendent, and this was able to happen under the F&M administration because Mr. Curtis is allegedly an F&M. What do you say? Do you deny categorically what he's saying? Just for the record.
As far as I'm aware, there have been 3 officers, and it would be wonderful if the minister, the prime minister or commissioner can clarify for the public. But I've been advised that there have been only 3 persons who have gotten the double promotions, and the name you call, the gentleman who was interdicted, is one of them. And in fact, I think that happened under this administration. So it would be useful if he could provide that information. My good cousin from Ragged Island has been wrong on many matters before. So as far as I'm aware, what he is saying is not accurate. But let me go to the crux of the matter. There isn't a possible chance under a Davis-Cooper administration that the head of CDU or the head of the 4th busiest airport in the Caribbean can be appointed without the concurrence of our Prime Minister. There isn't a possible chance. Not a possible chance. But what do we know of the PLP's record as it relates to F&Ms working in government? They have an abysmal record. Very seldom are we allowed, despite being qualified, to remain in strategic places or are hired to occupy strategic positions. So I don't believe Mr. Miller wants to open the can of worm on what motivates some of their selection. We don't want to go there.
Yes, one question for you, Mr. Pintard. I know during your speech, just now you would have mentioned some legislation that the Free National Movement is prepared to put forth if elected in the next general election. Do you believe that the Free National Movement is prepared to put forth legislation to move away from the Privy Council to bring back capital punishment, or to make sure that we see it more often with the amount of murders that we're seeing in the country? Behaviors have been outraged. It sparked national debate once again about capital punishment. Do you think that this is something that the Free National Movement is prepared to do if elected?
Yes. I'm sorry, you said when elected? Yeah. The short answer is no. The preliminary discussions we have had as an organization, two things. One is we recognize that the Privy Council is not the obstacle for the imposition of capital punishment. They're not the principal obstacle. The Caribbean Court of Justice, again, the sensibilities or the views of persons serving in the region, the regional court, as well as the Privy Council, they have similar views. We believe that there are some persons on our present bench that probably have similar views. So I mean, that's not the issue. And of course, as far as I'm aware, I'm not an attorney. We have several here today, but you can't have one without the other. If you want to get rid of the Privy Council, you get rid of the Privy Council. You don't keep it for criminal matters and dispense. You don't keep it for civil matters and then throw away for criminal matters. So I mean, the short answer is no. We are not contemplating that. We believe that our business community, that international investors, they have a significant amount of confidence in the Privy Council, and if we move as a country to the regional court, we believe that those persons on the bench in the regional court are as qualified as those in London. So we are not fundamentally opposed to it. All we are saying is we don't want people to get distracted in believing that the Privy Council or the regional court are the obstacles for capital punishment. We've already laid out what we believe the obstacles are. And so at the end of the day, we've laid out the case that we are prepared to have discussions with some folks much smarter than us about how we can in fact make the system more efficient, that we could define what is the worst of the worst, that we could assist in beefing up the sentencing guidelines so that we are able to carry out what is on the books. And I want to say for several of our supporters who reached out and raised the question, is it barbaric to put somebody to death because you are the state? Do you believe it prevents you from coming across as being barbaric? We don't believe it's barbaric at all. We believe that we put so much value on life that we need to send a message to would-be criminals that if you make the ultimate decision, which is to take somebody's life in the worst and heinous of ways, that one, as a deterrent for some, may not be the majority, we are prepared to apply the death penalty. As a punishment for persons who fall in that category, we are prepared to apply the death penalty. If we don't do it, at the end of the day, we are sending a message, in my view, to the streets. A part of this street justice problem, street justice in the country, where people are taking the law in their own hand. They don't believe that the system is moving fast enough, and they don't believe we are aggressive enough in putting criminals behind bars. What we have to make sure of is that the system does not fail. In other words, we need to make sure from the point of arrest to prosecution, we have the right person, that we are arresting and that we are prosecuting. That is important. And that brings us right back to why we're here today. The gatekeepers have to be honest. The persons participating in the investigation, the persons leading the prosecution, the persons sitting on the bench, the Prime Minister who must have a courage to read the death warrant. All along that food chain, we need to have people with integrity.
And just for the record, what's happening Wednesday morning at 9, just for the record?
Wednesday at 9, we're inviting everyone in the room, those of you that are home, to come out to Parliament. We want to protect the reputation of our law enforcement. We want to protect of those that are in fact living righteously. We want to protect the reputation of our institutions. We want the public to come out and send a message to the hard-headed PLP government that we are not prepared to stand idly by while you fail to act. And so we want you to come out and stand strong with us as we stand strong with you. Yes, 9 a.m. we want you to meet downtown in the front of Parliament. And again, it would be very much interested in seeing how vigilant the police was. The police was quite vigilant in barricading all of Parliament last week, Wednesday, up until the press conference. Up until the F&M press conference, police presence was heavy. They disappeared right before the press conference. So again, we want you to come down. We want you to come downtown and come downtown in numbers. Bring your placard so that let the government officials read what your sentiments are. Enough is truly enough.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, members of the press. Thank you for coming out today. That concludes our press conference. We look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Please drive safely.